Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're starting a brand new series entitled The All-Time Best QME Report. And the purpose of this program is to totally transform your final finished product, your work product that bears your signature, and your product that lives forever into perpetuity in Cyberland, which is your QME report. And whether you know it or not, right now as we speak, the Division of Workers' Compensation has assembled a group of stakeholders to come together to make some improvements in the system as a whole. And these improvements begin, the starting point for improving the system begins with the Qualified Medical Evaluators reports, which up till now have received some criticism for their content, for their quality, for their usability, and for their actual capacity or potential to resolve disputed issues in the workers' compensation system. And poor quality reports are a big problem in the system because they introduce unnecessary delays and unnecessary costs into the system, which could be easily eliminated if qualified medical evaluators as a group could just begin to author better quality reports that can actually resolve disputed issues the first time through. So the purpose of this program is to totally transform the profession, is to crank up the content and quality of each and every one of our reports such that our reports are a finished product of which we can be very, very proud. So that our finished product is something that we're happy to put our signature onto, so that our finished product QME reports can be something of which we can be very, very proud of. And in today's session, I want to talk to you about a very important topic, and that is how to add accuracy, truthfulness, and the perception of correctness in your opinions and conclusions. And if you can grasp the concept that I want to share with you today, your credibility, your persuasiveness as a qualified medical evaluator will dramatically improve. And this will dramatically improve your reputation as a competent and quality qualified medical evaluator. And the benefits of this are too numerous to mention, but just suffice to say that if you can improve the content and quality of your QME report, you can expect to be flooded with a glut of new evaluations as the parties realize that you, amongst all of the other qualified medical evaluators, actually write a quality report that can be used to push cases through the system and bring these cases to a successful resolution. So I have a fascinating program for you today, and I want to begin by sharing with you a very interesting concept known as verisimilitude in the QME report. And in today's session, I want to share with you 10 keys to compliance, to credibility, and to persuasiveness through your written word in your QME report. So I want to begin by talking about verisimilitude and what verisimilitude has to do with you and your QME report. So let's begin by defining this term, verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is going to be an important concept for you to understand as you author your very next QME report. So, verisimilitude is a Latin word which defined means the appearance of being true and the appearance of being real. Now, this is a very important concept because this is something that you want to convey through the written word of your QME report. You want the reader of your report to be convinced that your portrayal of the examinee, that your portrayal of the examinee's condition, that your portrayal of the examinee's lack of impairment or the examinee's actual impairment, and your portrayal of your take on the opinions and conclusions. You want the reader of the report to take your portrayal as true and as real. In other words, in order to convince the reader of the report of the accuracy of your opinions and conclusions, you do that by injecting verisimilitude into your QME reporting. And I'm going to share with you 10 ideas in today's session exactly how you can do just that. So let's go into this concept of verisimilitude. This is a Latin word from the roots ver, ver or ver, which stands for true or truth. And a couple of words that come from ver are words such as verdict or veracity or veritable, for example. All words of which convey some aspect of truthfulness or the truth. And then the second part of the root of verisimilitude is the root similitudo, which simply means similar, similar to, or like. And so verisimilitude, when we put it together, means that it's similarity to the truth. This is exactly what you want the reader of your report to assume when they consume your content in the body of your report, and that is that the content of your reporting is similar to or the truth. Okay? This is the concept of verisimilitude. Now, in fiction writing and in filmmaking in Hollywood, most writers and even filmmakers aim at some kind of verisimilitude to give their stories the air of reality. They need not show something actually true. They need not show something very common, but they simply show something or write something that is believable to be true or believable to be close to the truth. This is the concept of verisimilitude. And we as qualified medical evaluators, we are professional writers as well. Sometimes it seems like I'm a fiction writer with some of the content that goes into my reports, and I'm sure you may feel the same way sometimes. So we, in fact, are professional writers, and so verisimilitude can serve us within the body of our reports to convince the reader of the report that our opinions and conclusions within our report are the truth, are similar to the truth, are close to the truth, or are, in fact, actually the truth. Okay? So how do you get verisimilitude within the body of your report? Well, that's the topic of today's discussion. So in writing our QME reports and in writing in general, one simple method for achieving verisimilitude is to base your characters on actual people in your life. And our injured workers are actually people in our lives. And in describing the actual people of our lives, we want to use details about those people and inject details about those people into the body of our report to convey verisimilitude to the reader of our report. By doing so, you will create well-rounded characters. You will create a well-rounded mental image picture of your examinee to the reader of your report that jumps off the page and will bring reality. It will feel real to the readers. It will create an impression that the examinee is a real person to the reader of your report. And this sets the stage and the tone for the remainder of your report and begins to convince the reader of your report of the truthfulness, of the accuracy of your opinions and conclusions. Okay? So there's a brief introduction about verisimilitude. Let's talk about how to develop this concept of verisimilitude within the body of our reporting. Okay, so let's just repeat that definition one more time. Verisimilitude is the appearance of being true or real. And as we're going to find, we inject verisimilitude into the body of our reports through the use of details, that we use to describe our findings. So verisimilitude, as we're going to see, is going to be related to our details. Now, expert QME writers, and that's our goal, all of us as a group, is to become expert QME writers and to be perceived as expert QME writers so that we, so that you, so that all of us who are dedicated to improving the content and quality of our reports can garner the lion's share of qualified medical evaluators, as the parties seek evaluators who can actually write quality reports. So expert QME writers consider verisimilitude an essential literary device used to convince the reader of the report. The semblance of truth in specific sections of the report and throughout the whole report helps the readers connect to the work because they are able to believe that the conclusions are accurate. And we as qualified medical evaluators can aspire to no higher ideal than absolute accuracy in each of our opinions and conclusions. Now, Webster's dictionary tells us that verisimilitude is a theoretical concept that determines the level of truth in an assertion or a hypothesis, which is what we render as qualified medical evaluators. We refer to our assertions and hypotheses as opinions and conclusions, but they actually are nothing more than assertions and or hypotheses that we seek to use to convince the parties of their accuracy. Verisimilitude helps to promote a reader's willing suspension of disbelief. Willing suspension of disbelief. How many times have you ever read a QME report and had disbelief as to the accuracy of the report? You're reading this report and you go, this report is telling me nothing. It's not telling me anything. I don't believe any of these doctors' findings, these opinions and conclusions mean nothing, and you have disbelief. Well, our objective is to suspend the reader of our report's disbelief, and we do that through injecting details that have the quality of verisimilitude into our report. When using verisimilitude in our QME report writing, the goal is to be credible, convincing, and persuasive. And in just a moment, we're going to begin with 10 ideas for just that purpose, to be perceived as more credible, to be perceived as more convincing, and to be perceived as persuasive in our assertions and hypotheses in our QME reports. So let's talk about verisimilitude a little bit more, and then we'll get into our 10 keys for today's session. Okay, and so that we're all on the same page with this concept of verisimilitude, let's talk about some synonyms and antonyms of this word. So synonyms of verisimilitude would include words such as plausibility, words such as realism, words such as credibility, genuineness, likeliness, likeness, and or resemblance. So again, these are all words that convey a conception of similar to the truth. These are all words that describe believability and similar to the truth. Now, the opposite of verisimilitude are words such as difference, dissimilarity, meaning not similar to, dissimilar to, falseness, impossibility, unlikeliness, and falsity. And the purpose, the goal of using verisimilitude within the body of our reports is to have the reader of the report impressed that your history, your physical examination, and certainly, and most importantly, that the opinions and conclusions that you offer in the discussion section of your report are a truthful and accurate representation of the examinee's actual condition. The purpose of the use of verisimilitude is to suspend the reader's disbelief as they review the content of your report and convince the reader of the report of the accuracy, of the truthfulness, and the plausibility and the genuineness of your opinions and conclusions, such that your opinions and conclusions can actually be the opinions and conclusions that are used to resolve the case and to bring this plane in for a landing and to bring this case to a successful resolution. Now, I want to give you some examples of some actual content from QME reports, and I want to have you assess these passages from QME reports for the verisimilitude that's contained within each of these sections of the report. And then we'll talk about how we could perhaps change some of these sections of the report to convey to the reader of the report more verisimilitude. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of passages from actual QME reports, and I want you to ask yourself whether or not these particular passages contain what you would consider to be descriptions that are similar to the truth, descriptions that are plausible, descriptions that are genuine. Okay, we're looking for verisimilitude, the presence or absence of verisimilitude within these passages within an actual QME report. And we're going to ask ourselves as the reader of these passages, are these passages credible? Are they convincing? And are they persuasive? So for example, this is a passage from an actual QME report, and it says, the etiology and pathology of the aforementioned diagnosis was discussed with the patient in detail, which was understood well. Okay? Now, as you review this particular passage from this report, ask yourself, within this passage, is there detail contained within this passage that conveys verisimilitude to the reader of the report? Are you in any way convinced that this is a detailed and accurate and truthful description of what occurred with the examinee? The etiology and pathology of the aforementioned diagnosis. That is a passage that unfortunately lacks verisimilitude. There are no details within this passage that convey similarity to the truth or accuracy to the reader of the report. Next passage, I want you to assess this passage for its verisimilitude. It says, prior to seeing the patient, previous medical records and imaging were reviewed. I don't know who they were reviewed with. I don't know who reviewed them. I don't know which medical records were reviewed, who reviewed those, which medical records were reviewed. During the office, physical exam was performed and current medications as well as other recent history were reviewed. And you can see that this passage is devoid is absent verisimilitude, because there's no details within this passage that convey any similarity to the truth. Finally, it says oversight of any imaging performed, and I have no idea what that means. Oversight of any imaging performed and interpretation of that imaging was discussed with the patient. And again, this is a passage that's created by boilerplate text generating software systems that are absent and devoid of verisimilitude. And as you look at this passage, I just want to have you think to yourself as to how you could improve the detail contained within these descriptions to convey more verisimilitude, to create more confidence in the reader of the report that the final opinions and conclusions, whatever they may be later on in this particular report, whatever they may be, are accurate, are true, are opinions and conclusions that can be relied upon by the reader of the report. Finally, in this particular passage, it says this, in the report, it says, the patient's orthopedic diagnosis, which is what? Which is what? It doesn't say what is the diagnosis. Now, can you see that if the doctor included the actual diagnosis, the patient's diagnosis of right shoulder impingement syndrome with partial slap tear lesion of the glenoid labrum and the recommended treatment plan of physical therapy 3 times a week for 2 weeks, followed by a reevaluation appointment on June 10th, 2023. Can you see the detail that could be added to this passage that would add verisimilitude to this reporting, including alternative options such as what? To this treatment plan, as well as work status and or activity recommendation Was it work status and activity recommendation, or was it just work status, or was it just activity recommendations that were reviewed in detail? And I think you'll agree with me that this passage, and actually all three of these passages within the body of this report, all coming from the same report, are created by random text generating software for which the doctor probably used a checkbox form to check off each one of these pre-planned, pre-prepared, canned sentences are contained within the report generating software. And can you see that these passages contain absolutely no verisimilitude, no resemblance to the truth, no detail that is credible, convincing, and or persuasive of the reader. So what can be done about this? Well, let's contrast two different descriptions of a passage from a QME report, in this case dealing with causation, AOE and COE. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of different options that are available to us in presenting our opinion on industrial causation, AOE, COE. And I want you to ask yourself, which of the following two paragraphs that I'm going to share with you are more credible? Which of the two is more convincing? Which of the two is more persuasive? Okay, so you may recognize this particular passage. You probably read something similar to this in reports 1,000 times. So with regards to causation, the doctor says that the stated mechanism of injury is consistent with my clinical exam findings, and no information has presented that would indicate a cause of other than the alleged employment exposure. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that this paragraph basically says nothing. It doesn't describe the mechanism of injury. It doesn't describe the exam findings. It doesn't correlate those two together to come up with a verisimilitude opinion that is either for or against industrial causation. And you can tell that this passage is simply something that is created by boilerplated, canned, random text generating software that does not include details of the specific examinee in question, and therefore does not contain verisimilitude that can convince the reader of the report that the causation opinion is truthful, that it's accurate, that it's the true and accurate conclusion for this particular case. Now, a better paragraph, and I agree it's not a perfect paragraph, but it's a better paragraph, would be something as follows that contains more verisimilitude. Okay, so the stated mechanism of injury, and here the doctor reiterates the mechanism of injury to add detail to his phraseology of the stated mechanism of injury. The doctor here says specifically, a highway construction worker truck with bumpers and equipment to prevent an accident injury on the highway was rear-ended by a high-speed car. So here, through the use of this detail, the writer of this report, the QME, convinces the reader of the report that he or she, meaning the qualified medical evaluator, is aware of the details of the circumstance of the mechanism of injury. So the opinion and conclusion that the qualified medical evaluator is going to offer is going to be based, at least in part, on verisimilitude details related to the mechanism of injury. So this mechanism of injury caused a jerking of the neck and lower back. It caused left hand and wrist soreness, and all of these are consistent with my clinical exam findings that demonstrate muscle and tendon strain of the neck and lumbar region, ligament sprain of the lumbar spine, contusion to the right and left hands and wrists, and an abrasion over the right ankle. So here the qualified medical evaluator gets specific with detail that adds verisimilitude to the report and convinces the reader of the report of the accuracy of the qualified medical evaluator's opinion on industrial causation through the use of accurate and specific details. So this is a report, this is an argument that has injected into it and introduced into it verisimilitude. And it's the verisimilitude that suspends the reader's disbelief and convinces the reader of the accuracy of the opinion and conclusion. Okay? So how can we inject verisimilitude within the body of our reports? I now want to go into the topic of today's discussion, which is entitled 10 Keys to Compliance, Credibility, and Persuasiveness. Okay, so let's begin with our 10 keys to compliance, credibility, and persuasiveness through the use of verisimilitude in your QME report. And I now want to share with you 10 ideas that you can use in your very next report. And this is just an overview of these ideas. We'll go into more depth and detail about each of these ideas in our subsequent sessions. But idea number one and step number one is to perfect the formatting of your report. And this is a verb, perfect. Now the formatting of your report should be in exact compliance and adherence with the formatting that's described in California Code of Regulation 10606. And we don't have time to discuss that today, but you can put this into your Google search bar, 10606 CCR, and you can see exactly what this Code of Regulation has to say about how your QME report should look. And you want your QME report to exactly follow the formatting described in this Code of Regulation. And when the reader of the report sees that your report follows an established format established by law, the reader of the report will be convinced, number one, that you know the law, and number two, that you're following the law and the various laws associated with your face-to-face evaluation and also with the writing of your final QME report. The next idea, the next step in injecting verisimilitude into the body of your report is to evidence, and this again is a verb, evidence your compliance with regulations. And there's about a dozen important labor codes and codes of regulation that are operative in our face-to-face evaluation and within our QME reporting. And you want to evidence to the parties not only that you know those labor codes and those codes of regulation, but also that you follow those codes of regulation, that you follow the dictates of those labor codes within the body of your report. And by doing so, you inject and introduce and install verisimilitude and believability and credibility and persuasiveness within the body of your report through the use of these particular laws, codes of regulation, and labor codes. So just some examples, and this is not a complete list. California Codes of Regulation 34B and 35.5B both talk about the location where the QME evaluation is to be conducted. And you want to show the reader of your report within the body of your report that you complied with these particular codes of regulation. Similarly, California Code of Regulation talks about the disclosure requirements, and the disclosure requirements are required. That's why they're called requirements. But very few qualified medical evaluators are aware of the disclosure requirements, and very few actually use the disclosure requirements and review the disclosure requirements with the examinee during the face-to-face evaluation, and it's required. It's actually required by law. So you want to evidence and demonstrate to the parties that you're aware of this and that you complied with this particular code of regulation. And you do this within the body of your report. And the reader of your report, when they read this, when they read that you complied with these codes of regulation, has their belief about you and has their belief, has their disbelief about you and their disbelief about your opinions and conclusions suspended when they identify and locate these items of verisimilitude within the body of your report. CCR 9795 talks about our billing level for our particular evaluation, and so you want to include a clear, concise statement in a separate section at the beginning of the report wherein you detail to the reader of the report which particular billing code under CCR 9795 you are billing this particular evaluation. And you must be very, very accurate and never make a mistake on this particular billing code. Imagine what it does to your credibility to have the reader of the report be reading from you an initial comprehensive medical legal evaluation for which you mistakenly use a billing code associated with a follow-up medical legal evaluation, or you use a billing code associated with a supplemental medical legal evaluation. It immediately damages the persuasive content and quality of your report. So always make sure that the level of billing code that you're using coincides with the type of evaluation that you're actually doing. And then a very important code of regulation is Code of Regulation 35.5C1. This talks about the reporting duties of the qualified medical evaluator, and it tells us that the qualified medical evaluator shall attempt to answer each of the questions of each of the parties in the issue cover letters sent to the qualified medical evaluator in advance of the face-to-face evaluation. And you want to demonstrate to the parties that you are aware of this regulation, that you abide by this regulation, and that you comply with this regulation by answering each of the questions of each of the parties within a separate and distinct section within the body of your report. Can you see that by complying with just these codes of regulation and these labor codes, that the reader of your report becomes convinced as to the truthfulness and the accuracy of your opinions and conclusions? Whatever those opinions and conclusions may be, these are components of verisimilitude that you can introduce and install in your report that will suspend any disbelief that the reader of the report may have about you and or about your opinions and conclusions. Okay, step number 3 to install verisimilitude within the body of your report has to do with your review of records. Now, you may not know this, but there's 4 laws that govern the review of records. And if you can follow the 2 labor codes and the 2 codes of regulation for a total of 4 laws, if you can follow those 4 laws and create an impressive review of records, you can convince the reader of your report and impress the reader of your report of your meticulous attention to detail within not only this section of the report, but within all sections of your report, and thereby come across as a very credible and persuasive qualified medical evaluator. So I'm going to show you an actual review of records section in the body of a QME report. But just know, and these are some labor codes that you should look up. There's 2 labor codes, 4062.3D and 4628A2. These are 2 labor codes that govern the review of records. And then there's also 2 codes of regulation, CCR 10606 and then CCR 41B2, that tell us between all of these 4 laws, they tell us how to construct our review of records and what must be contained within the review of records in order to comply with the requirements of these sections. So if you evidence to the parties that you know these regulations and you know these labor codes, and that you comply with these labor codes within the body of your report, It creates a very, very credible perception of you as a meticulous, as a fastidious, and as an accurate qualified medical evaluator. And these are just other instances of verisimilitude that you can install in your report to create just such an impression in the mind of the reader of the report. Also, your review of records now that we're under the new medical legal fee schedule effective April 2021, now you must include an accurate prepared statement of the numbers of pages that you received from the parties in connection with your evaluation. And I'll show you exactly how you can install that into the review of records section of your report such that the reader of the report is impressed with your meticulous attention to detail. And it's this type of verisimilitude that creates an overall impression of you as a top-notch and accurate qualified medical evaluator. So here's an example of the review of records section of the report. And what I want to show you here is the prepared statement wherein you declare to the parties the exact page count of records that you reviewed in connection with the evaluation. So it would say something like this: I, John Smith, PhD, QME, declare under penalty of perjury that pursuant to two laws, one labor code, which is Labor Code Section 4628, and then also California Code of Regulations Section 9793N, I have reviewed 1,000 pages of 8.5 by 11 single-sided documents, chart or paper, whether in physical or electronic form, records in connection with my examination of Mr. Jones. I received the following documents, and here you outline the number of pages of documents that you received from each of the parties. And can you see that this particular use of detail, this introduction and injection of verisimilitude into the report, convinces the reader of this, at least of this section of the report, and also of the entire report, of the accuracy and the attention to detail that you as the qualified medical evaluator employ in arriving at your final opinions and conclusions, whatever they may be. And you follow that up by saying, attached to this report are the declarations and attestations as to these exact numbers of pages that I received from the parties. And this simple sentence conveys to the reader of the report that you are accurate, that you are by the book, that you are sincere, and that you are a truthful and accurate reporter within not only this section of the report, but also all sections of the entire QME report. Finally, you add in that you recognize that there's there's 2 labor codes and 2 codes of regulation that govern the review of records, and you tell us that you complied with each of those by following the instructions as to what is required by those sections, what is required to be included within your review of records in order to comply with those sections, and then you comply with those sections within the review of records table within the body of your report. And so this is how you inject verisimilitude and create an impressive review of records section within the body of your report. Okay, step number 4 to introduce and install verisimilitude within the body of your report has to do with your organized writing style and organized writing skills. And as we know, organized writing comes first from organized thinking. So one way that you can demonstrate to the reader of the report that your thinking is clear and organized, and these are just a couple of ideas, has to do with the use of, number 1, headers and footers within your report, headers and footers. And headers and footers can demonstrate an organization of your report to the reader of the report and also to yourself. And a couple of ideas. In the header of your report, you can include such information as the name of the examinee and also of the date of injury. These are the two pieces of information that I use in my headers. Some evaluators use additional data within the header section of the report, such as the claim number, such as the examinee's date of birth. I suggest that you keep the header section of your report brief to keep it from getting overly cluttered, but include enough detail within the header section of the report to convince the reader of the report that you indeed have specific attention to detail on each page of the report. In the footer section, I suggest that you install the page number of the report that corresponds with the particular page that the reader is reading. Some evaluators use an option, a footer option, that describes the page number out of the total number of pages. So the footer might say page 7 of 17 pages, something like that. So feel free to use the various options that are available to you in Microsoft Word to customize the header and footer sections of your report, but do include some type of data in the header and some type of data in the footer sections of your report. Also, the use of bullet points and numbered lists will convey to the reader that you have an organized flow of the recitation of your data and an organized flow to the construction of your opinions and conclusions through the use of the data that's contained within these bullet point or numbered lists that conveniently depict important data to the reader of the report. Next, step number 5 is you want to include within the body of your report an accurate activities of daily living assessment. Now, my very best suggestion to you, and this is something I've been preaching for many, many years, is that the activities of daily living assessment is something that must be done in the face-to-face evaluation on an interactive basis between you and the examinee. And nowhere in the body of your report can you install more verisimilitude than within your activities of daily living assessment. So the activities of daily living assessment is something that you participate with the examinee in arriving at accurate and truthful limitations to activities of daily living. And I've spoken about this on other programs, and I won't go into it in much more detail here, except to say that you must conduct a formal activities of daily living assessment in the face-to-face interview, and then install those findings, the findings from that interview with the examinee, within the body of your report, and then summarize those findings so that the reader of the report has an awareness and a knowledge of the true limitations to activities of daily living that are being experienced by the claimant, and in your case, by the examinee. And step number 6, to install verisimilitude within the body of your report, has to do with an accurate physical examination. Now, an accurate physical examination includes 2 basic components. Number 1, which I have listed here, is that it complies with all requirements of the AMA guides. And as you know, the AMA guides are very, very concerned with objective examination data. So therefore, it's critical that you include in your reporting, in your physical examination section, all objective test findings. Never, ever, ever leave the face-to-face physical examination with a single objective test undone. And always report your objective findings, your objective measurements, your objective range of motion measurements to the exact degree, to the exact millimeter, to the exact angle. In other words, don't round off your numbers. I can't tell you how much more verisimilitude is perceived by the reader to read a range of motion finding of 38 degrees compared to a range of motion reading of 40 degrees, which is rounded to the nearest 5 degrees. If all range of motion measurements are rounded to the nearest 5 degrees, that is much less accurate, much less perception of truthfulness, much less verisimilitude than range of motion measurements which read 34, 42, 49, 51, 55, and 54. Those range of motion measurements convey much more verisimilitude than range of motion measurements that are simply rounded to the nearest 5 degrees. Additionally, your physical examination should be a physical examination that has as its purpose to identify the presence or absence of permanent impairments. So the physical examination that you employ in the medical legal evaluation is different, much different from the physical examination procedures that you employ in your clinical practice. So do not use clinical physical examination procedures in your medical legal evaluation. The purpose of the permanent impairment evaluation is to determine the presence or absence of permanent impairments. So therefore, in complying with all of the requirements of the AMA guides, your physical examination should have as its purpose to determine whether the examinee has or does not have impairments. So therefore, the principle is to know the impairments of each body part and each body region. Know what are the impairments that are described in the AMA guides, and then examine specifically for the presence or the absence of those particular impairments and report on those particular findings using exact objective measurements within the body of your report. And this will convey tremendous verisimilitude to the reader of your report. Okay, steps number 7 and 8 to install more and more verisimilitude within the body of your report have to do with the discussion section of your report. Now, it's the discussion section of your report wherein you offer your opinions and conclusions. It's where you bring the plane in for a landing. Okay, so the first section of your report is where you establish all of the data, all of the history, all of the physical exam findings. You report on the review of records. All of that takes place in the first half of the report. And the second half of the report is where you synthesize all of that data and you integrate the facts and findings from that data into opinions and conclusions that are accurate and upon which the case can progress forward, move forward, or can be concluded. All rests upon the discussion section of your report. And many readers of the report consider the discussion section of our report to be the most important section of the report. Many readers don't even read the first half of the report. They go directly to the second half, which is the discussion section of the report. So in order to create a credible and persuasive and convincing discussion section of the report, you must always provide how and why reasoning for each opinion and conclusion that you offer within the body of your report. So just remember this as a principle. Every time you offer an opinion, you say, in my opinion, such and such and such, you must then follow that opinion up with how and why reasoning and explain to us why you come to such a conclusion, why you have such an opinion, and how you arrived at the conclusion and how you arrived at the opinion, and that how and why reasoning must be based on relevant facts from the first half of the report, from the factual data sections of the report. So in this sense, the first half of the report and the second half of the report must coincide and must be synchronous and must be consistent with each other, because the discussion section of the report relies upon the data from the first half, the data-filled section of the report. Okay, so always provide how and why reasoning for each opinion and conclusion that you offer. And nowhere is this more important than in your permanent impairment discussion. And the permanent impairment discussion is so critical. This is the first section of the report that many of the readers of the report go to look to where this case is going. And nowadays, with the complexity involved in the permanent impairment determination, it's more important than ever that we give great consideration to many, many details in this section of our report. So step number 1 is to address all questions requested in the cover letters from the parties. And typically, the defense attorneys and the applicant attorneys will have different sets of questions for us. And it's important that you answer each question of each party, because each of those parties have different needs, have different interests, have different concerns, and are seeking different outcomes for the same examinee. So it's essential that you answer both parties' questions completely and accurately, and with how and why reasoning. You must also offer an opinion under the strict interpretation of the AMA guides, and then also give some consideration or demonstrate to the readers of the report that you gave consideration to an alternative impairment rating under Alvarez and Guzman, as well as under any other analogies, such as a kite analysis. Now, when I say this to you, I'm not indicating to you that you have to offer an alternative impairment rating and that you have to offer a kite analysis. That's not required that you do that in each and every evaluation, but what is required in rendering what's referred to as a complete evaluation is that you give consideration to whether or not there's an alternative impairment rating that may be more accurate for the examinee, or whether adding versus combining the impairments is more accurate. So you don't have to do these things, but you have to demonstrate to the parties that you considered an alternative impairment rating, and that you considered adding the impairments versus combining the impairments. You must specifically address other things in coming up with your permanent impairment determination. For example, you must specifically address whether or not pain qualifies for an additional impairment. And tell us if it doesn't. Tell us within the body of your report. And it's these elements within the permanent impairment section of your report that install and introduce verisimilitude into your final conclusion, that makes your conclusion credible, persuasive, convincing, and actually makes it an opinion that's the truthful and most accurate and most appropriate determination for that particular examinee. And all opinions must always be supported by how and why reasoning, always based upon an adequate exam, as we talked about in step number 6. Okay? And I have for you 2 more additional secrets to create credibility and persuasiveness in your reporting. Okay, step number 9 to install verisimilitude within the body of your report has to do with your apportionment section of your report. And as you already know, the apportionment section of your report is where the rubber really meets the road. This is where the parties determine whether you as the qualified medical evaluator know what you're doing, or that you don't know what it is that you're doing, or what it is that you're supposed to be doing in divvying up the liability for the permanent impairment for this particular examinee. So the apportionment section of your report should be amazing. It should be something that you give great time and great consideration to arrive at a approximate percentage of the permanent impairment due to the industrial injury, and the approximate percentage due to other factors that's persuasive, that's credible, and that's accurate. And here's some ideas as to how to do just that. Number 1, exactly address the apportionment questions that are posed to you in the cover letters from the parties. And it's very interesting. If you carefully read the questions that the parties send to you, you gain an understanding of the perspective of each of the parties. And the parties reveal their intentions within the questions that they pose to you in their issue cover letters. So make sure to read carefully and respond carefully and specifically to each of those questions. Any opinion or conclusion that you offer on your apportionment approximate percentages must be based on relevant facts and details, and this is simply a consideration of the requirements of the Escobedo case, which gives us our exact formula, our exact recipe to use in arriving at accurate opinions and conclusions on the apportionment approximate percentages. Your opinions must always be supported by how and why reasoning, and must always be based upon an adequate history and an adequate exam. And again, these are just some of the tenets of the Escobedo case. Now, a very interesting nuance is that reasons, how and why reasoning, is always based on facts. Your reasons must be based on facts. But not all facts are reasons. All reasons must be based on facts, but not all facts are reasons. So you want to make sure that the facts that you offer in support of your apportionment approximate percentages can actually be converted or communicated as reasons. So when you cite the fact upon which your apportionment approximate percentage is based, make sure that you mold it and massage that fact into a reason that supports your apportionment approximate percentage. In the apportionment section of your report, you must demonstrate your understanding of both Labor Codes 4663 and 4664, and these are our apportionment laws. These are our apportionment laws. So you can begin your apportionment section of your report by first considering all apportionment under first Labor Code 4663, and then secondly, all or any apportionment under Labor Code 4664. And that's always a good way to fashion and format your apportionment section of your report, is based upon the apportionment due to each of these particular labor codes. And then finally, when it comes to providing your apportionment approximate percentage, that approximate percentage must be based on relevant facts. Well, of all the facts most relevant to the apportionment approximate percentages have to do with the mechanism of injury. So here you install verisimilitude in your apportionment determination by demonstrating your importance of the understanding of the mechanism of injury and how that mechanism of injury factors into your apportionment approximate percentages. And this is something we're going to go into greater detail in our subsequent section. Okay, and then finally, step number 10, to install and introduce more verisimilitude within the body of your report to create compliance with all of the labor codes and codes of regulation that govern the QME report, to create credibility and to create persuasiveness within the body of your report, has to do with some general suggestions regarding your report in general. So these are just a potpourri of ideas that will help improve the credibility of your overall report. So number one, the writing style should demonstrate that it's free from bias of any kind. And there's many types and many manifestations of bias in medical legal reporting. And our obligation as qualified medical evaluators is to be neutral, impartial, and objective. And therefore, you want to review your writing style for any evidence of either explicit or implicit bias within your opinions and conclusions. Next, the layout, the organization, and the formatting of the report should look impressive. And one way to confirm this is to put your report in the print view. Microsoft Word has what's called the print view. And the print view gives you small overview of the pages and multiple pages at the same time, so that you can look at the formatting of the report as to how it appears across single pages and across multiple pages as a whole, so that you can see that all of the spacing is symmetric, all the topic headlines are bolded, All of the formatting is perfectly impressively placed within the page, and that the report looks organized and looks impressive. And this is something that's easy to do with modern word processing systems. Word processing systems such as Microsoft Word allow us to use an editor function so that we can confirm that the report is perfectly proofread, that there's no typos, that there's no syntax errors, that there's no double negatives, so that there's no improper pronouns saying he where it should say she. And Microsoft Word, for example, and there are other word processing softwares out there, but Microsoft Word, for example, has an editor function that does the editing for you. It does the proofreading for you. It does the spell checking for you, and it does a series of other steps for you as well to help you create a report that's free from errors, because errors detract verisimilitude from the report, whereas a perfectly edited report adds verisimilitude and credibility to the reporting in general. The reporting should not contain puff-up language. It should always use the first-person pronouns such as I, me, and my. Puff-up language is language such as "it is the opinion of this evaluator," or "it is the opinion of the undersigned," or things like "in my 35 years of experience." In other words, puff-up language that really adds nothing to the content of the report. Rather, the report should contain certainty language and should use certainty terms and should steer away from and eliminate and omit any uncertainty terms. Uncertainty terms would be terms like "it appears," "it seems," "I believe," etc. And rather, all of those uncertainty terms should be replaced with certainty, much more definite, short declarative statements that convey verisimilitude to the reader of the report. And also, whenever possible or whenever applicable, you can include medical photography within the body of your report, which, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a picture adds 1,000 units of verisimilitude to any physical examination finding that you may report on in the physical exam section of your report. So medical photography, where appropriate, adds tremendous credibility to your reporting as a qualified medical evaluator. So doctors, there you have it, the 10 keys, the 10 secrets to install compliance, to install credibility, and to install persuasiveness within the body of your report through the use of this very interesting concept known as verisimilitude. Again, verisimilitude has the definition of appearing similar to the truth. And we create truth and an impression of truth within the body of our report through the use of details. And I've given you here 10 areas of the report and 10 different ways where you can install detail into each of these unique sections of the report to convince the reader of the report of your accuracy and your attention to detail and your meticulous fastidiousness as a qualified medical evaluator. And nothing can do, we can aspire to no higher ideal as qualified medical evaluators than accuracy within the body of our report. So doctors, I hope this helps you, and I hope you take these suggestions to heart in your very next evaluation. In our next session, we're going to expand upon today's topic, dealing with the hands-down, all-time best qualified medical evaluation report. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.